Remember the 5th of November. Gunpowder, treason and plot. The old rhyme echoes over darkened streets as we open on a cold autumn night in London, 1605. In a dim cellar beneath the Houses of Parliament, a lone figure, Guy Fawkes, stands guard over dozens of wooden barrels. Each is filled with gunpowder, enough to obliterate the building above and everyone in it. This is no ordinary night. It is the eve of November 5th, 1605, and Fawkes and his fellow conspirators are minutes away from launching a treasonous act that will shake England to its core. But how did England come to this perilous moment? To understand the Gunpowder Plot, we must step back in time and examine the hostile political and religious tensions brewing in England leading up to 1605. England in the late 16th century was a nation fractured along religious lines. Decades earlier, King Henry VIII's break from the Catholic Church and the English Reformation had established Protestantism as the state religion. Under Henry's daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, strict laws punished those who clung to the Catholic faith. Catholics, known as recusants if they refused to attend Anglican services, faced heavy fines, imprisonment, even execution for practicing their religion. Priests performed secret masses in safe houses, at great risk to their lives. England's Catholics lived as a marginalized underclass, hoping and praying for relief. By 1603, English Catholics had endured decades of persecution. They were fined simply for not attending the Protestant Church of England services, and repeat offenders could be imprisoned or executed. Many clung to their faith in secret. You can imagine their desperate longing for a change in policy, a hope that a new monarch might tolerate Catholic worship. That new monarch arrived when King James VI of Scotland succeeded the childless Elizabeth, becoming King James I of England in 1603. James's ascent initially inspired optimism among Catholics. His mother had been the Catholic Mary Queen of Scots, and James himself had hinted at a more moderate stance. He even swore he would not persecute any that will be quiet and give an outward obedience to the law. In the early days of his reign, some Catholics rejoiced, believing their hardships might finally ease under the new king's rule. Unfortunately, these hopes were short-lived. James's tolerance quickly waned. Within a year of taking the throne, he was facing pressure from Protestant advisors and uncovering minor Catholic plots against him. In February 1604, after learning the Pope had sent a token of support, a rosary, to James's Catholic wife, the king's attitude hardened. James banished all Catholic priests and reimposed the punitive recusant fines that had lapsed. By 1605, over 5,000 recusants were convicted and paying hefty fines for not conforming to the Church of England. The message was clear. There would be no Catholic toleration under King James. The disappointment was crushing. Many Catholics had truly believed James I would grant them relief. Instead, he doubled down on anti-Catholic measures. The community felt betrayed. Their last hope of peaceful change extinguished. This is the volatile atmosphere in which a group of desperate men began plotting something dramatic. Among those disillusioned Catholics was a charismatic English gentleman named Robert Catesby. Born to a distinguished Catholic family, Catesby was intelligent, devout, and zealous. He had already flirted with treason before. He'd been involved in a failed rebellion against Elizabeth in 1601, and he had paid fines for his faith. By 1605, Catesby saw England's Catholic plight as dire. In his eyes, a desperate disease requires a dangerous remedy. If the king would not grant freedom of religion, then Catesby resolved to eliminate the king and force a regime change. Catesby's bold idea was to assassinate King James I and as much of the Protestant ruling class as possible in one blow. He envisioned nothing less than blowing up the Palace of Westminster, the Houses of Parliament, during the state opening, when the King, the Queen, the Prince of Wales and the Lords and Commons would all be gathered in the Lord's Chamber. This single, thunderous explosion could decapitate the entire government. In the ensuing chaos, the plotters planned to incite a rebellion, rally England's oppressed Catholics, and install James's 9-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth, on the throne as a figurehead Catholic monarch. With a child queen under their influence, they hoped to restore Catholic rule in England. It was a radical plan, essentially regicide and revolution. But remember, Europe in 1605 was embroiled in religious wars, and some Catholic thinkers had argued that removing a heretic king was a moral duty. Catesby and his allies convinced themselves that King James's oppression made him a tyrant. In their minds, God would justify a violent blow for the Catholic cause. To carry out this audacious plot, Catesby needed trusted hands and specialized skills. Over the spring of 1604, he began recruiting a small band of conspirators, sworn to secrecy and bound by loyalty to the Catholic faith. His core recruits included Thomas Wintour, a scholarly, multilingual gentleman and experienced soldier who had once fought in the Netherlands. Catesby sent Wintour to seek support from Catholic Spain for an uprising, but Spain, recently at peace with England, declined to intervene. Returning empty-handed, Wintour nonetheless agreed to join Catesby's plot. John Wright, one of the finest swordsmen in England and a devout Catholic. Wright had also been part of the 1601 uprising with Catesby and was eager to strike back at the government. Thomas Percy, a distant relation of the powerful Northumberland family, and himself a convert to Catholicism. Percy had connections. He served as a gentleman pensioner, royal bodyguard, which gave him a pretext to secure a lodging near Parliament. And crucially, Guy Fawkes, who sometimes went by Guido. 34 years old, tall, and battle-hardened, Fawkes was an English Catholic who had spent 10 years fighting as a mercenary in the Spanish Netherlands. He was an explosives expert, exactly the sort of man Catesby needed. Brought into the plot by Wintour, Guy Fawkes would be trusted with the most dangerous job of all, handling the gunpowder itself. May 1604. In a private chamber at the Duck and Drake Inn in London, Catesby meets with Thomas Wintour, John Wright, Thomas Percy, and Guy Fawkes. The men speak in hushed, intense tones. Catesby leans forward, eyes blazing. He firmly tells the men, "Our patience is spent. Let us give the attempt, and where it faileth, pass no further." The other men exchange looks of resolve and trepidation. They place their hands on a Bible and swear an oath of secrecy, vowing to support the plot unto death. Next door, coincidentally, a Catholic priest is saying Mass. The conspirators quietly join in taking the Eucharist after sealing their pact. The gunpowder treason has begun. Over the next year, Catesby's secret society expanded to about 13 members as new allies were cautiously admitted. They included Catesby's cousin, Francis Tresham, wealthy young noblemen like Everard Digby and Ambrose Rookwood, and others with the resources to fund the conspiracy or provide safe houses and horses. Each man brought something useful: money, arms, or strategic position, For example, Sir Everard Digby was to organise a hunting party of Catholic gentry in the Midlands on the appointed day, a cover for launching a rebellion and kidnapping Princess Elizabeth from her residence in the countryside. The heart of the plan, however, was in London. The conspirators had to get a huge quantity of gunpowder into position beneath the House of Lords. Initially, they considered digging a tunnel to reach under Parliament. They even began tunnelling from a rented house, but progress was slow and uncertain. Fortune intervened when they learned of a vacant undercroft, a cellar storage room, directly below the Lord's chamber. One of the plotters, Thomas Percy, managed to rent this cellar. It was the perfect hiding place. By early 1605, the plotters quietly moved about 36 barrels of gunpowder into the undercroft, concealed beneath firewood and coal. Guy Fawkes, under the alias John Johnson, posed as a caretaker of this property and guarded it while final preparations were made. The opening of Parliament, originally scheduled for February 1605, was delayed to 5th November 1605 due to fears of the plague. This gave the plotters even more time to refine their plans and to keep the volatile gunpowder dry. By October 1605, everything was nearly in place. They planned for Guy Fawkes to ignite a slow fuse in the cellar during the grand state opening ceremony. The fuse would give him enough time to escape by boat across the Thames. Meanwhile, Catesby and others would spur an uprising in the Midlands, seize Princess Elizabeth, and declare her the new sovereign. It was a complex, risky plan, but if executed perfectly, it could change the course of English history in one flaming instant. It's hard to overstate how close the plotters came to success. They had amassed an enormous amount of gunpowder. Government records later indicated it was enough to blast the House of Lords to rubble. Many of the highest nobles and officials in the land would have been present above that cellar. Had Fawkes lit the fuse, the explosion would have obliterated the king, his family, and virtually the entire Protestant leadership in one stroke. England's government would have been decapitated. Yet, even as the dominoes were set to fall, doubt and anxiety crept in among some conspirators. They realized that when the bomb went off, not only Protestants would die, innocent Catholics could be caught in the blast, including friends and allies who would be attending Parliament that day. Several plotters worried about specific Catholic lords. Lord Monteagle, William Parker, a Catholic peer, was one such person of concern. These moral qualms would prove to be the plot's undoing. On October 26, 1605, Lord Monteagle received a mysterious letter. The author's identity remains a mystery to this day, but the message was clear: stay away from the state opening of Parliament. The letter said, "My Lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I have a care of your preservation. Therefore, I would advise you, as you tender your life, to devise some excuse to shift your attendance at this Parliament. For God and man hath concurred to punish the wickedness of this time. They shall receive a terrible blow, this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them." Within hours, Lord Monteagle is galloping through the night to Whitehall Palace. Monteagle wasted no time delivering this warning to the authorities. He rode straight to Whitehall and placed the letter into the hands of King James's chief minister, Lord Robert Cecil, Earl of Salisbury. The government now had a crucial clue that something nefarious was planned. The letter's cryptic reference to a terrible blow set alarm bells ringing. When King James was shown the letter a few days later, he reportedly seized on the word blow and exclaimed that it hinted at some stratagem of fire and powder, vividly recalling how his own father had been assassinated by an explosion years before. King James and his council realized that Parliament itself might be the target. The plotters, meanwhile, got wind that their secret was leaking. Monteagle's servant, who had connections to one of the conspirators, actually warned Catesby that the government had the letter. Panic swept through the group. Catesby suspected, perhaps rightly, that the letter had been sent by one of their own. He confronted Francis Tresham, who denied writing it. Some urged abandoning the plan altogether, but after a tense meeting, Catesby and his closest allies resolved to go forward anyway. They believed, or desperately hoped, that the letter was too vague to expose them. As November 4th turned to night, London was on edge. Acting on the Monteagle letter, the authorities decided to conduct a thorough search of the Parliament buildings, above and below. So Thomas Knivet, a justice of the peace, led a team of men on this critical mission. They swept through the cellars in the evening, intent on discovering anything unusual. Fawkes's ruse had failed. In that moment, swords were drawn, and Guy Fawkes, still using the alias John Johnson, was tackled to the ground and arrested. In his possession, they found a pocket watch and several slow matches, fuses, tools of a man ready to ignite an explosion. By the early hours of November 5th, 1605, Fawkes was in chains, and the great conspiracy was laid bare. 36 barrels of gunpowder were discovered, hidden under the wood and coal. An arsenal powerful enough to obliterate the Palace of Westminster. Upon hearing that Fawkes had been captured, the other conspirators still in London fled with haste. Robert Catesby, Thomas Percy, the Wright brothers, John and Christopher, and others, mounted horses and sped northwest out of the city, hoping to escape and rally support as planned. They stopped at one safe house after another, collecting arms and allies where they could, and by the next day they had reached Holbeach House, a manor on the remote border of Staffordshire. There, the fugitives made a final stand. Holbeach House, a rain-soaked evening on November 7th, 1605. Catesby and his remaining band bar the doors and load their muskets. They are exhausted, soaked, and some are injured. Wet and desperate, the conspirators attempted to dry out some of their damp gunpowder by spreading it in front of the fireplace. In a dark twist of fate, a stray spark from the hearth landed on the powder. Whoosh! It ignited in a sudden flash of flame. The explosion severely burnt Catesby and others. One conspirator, John Grant, was blinded. This accidental blast was a grim foreshadowing of the destruction they had planned for Parliament. Early the next morning, November 8th, 1605, the law arrived at Holbeach House. The Sheriff of Worcestershire, Sir Richard Walsh, led about 200 militiamen to surround the manor. He called for the conspirators to surrender. Catesby and his compatriots, though battered, refused and chose to fight. In the brief siege that followed, musket shots tore through the smoky morning air. One crack shot from Sheriff Walsh's men struck Robert Catesby and Thomas Percy with a single bullet as they stood side by side, killing them both with one shot. Brothers John and Christopher Wright were also cut down by gunfire. The remaining conspirators, stunned and leaderless, threw down their arms. Ambrose Rookwood, Thomas Wintour, wounded in the shoulder, and a few others were captured alive at the scene. The Gunpowder Plot rebellion had collapsed in a hail of bullets and flames, just 3 days after its discovery.
In the immediate aftermath, government officers fanned out to round up anyone connected to the plot.
Across England, homes were raided. Hiding priests and Catholic sympathizers were arrested in droves. In London, Guy Fawkes, the lone plotter in custody from the start, was not yielding his secrets easily. He initially maintained a steely silence under questioning, giving only his alias and mocking authorities with the claim that he acted alone. King James was impressed by Fawkes's iron fortitude, even calling him a man of Roman resolution for his courage. But the king was determined to know everything. He authorized the use of torture, a rarely sanctioned measure, to break Guy Fawkes's will. After 2 days of excruciating torture in the Tower of London, Guy Fawkes finally gave in. His resolve shattered, he provided his true name and revealed the names of his co-conspirators. With Fawkes's confession and the testimony of captured plotters, the government swiftly compiled a case against the survivors of the Gunpowder Plot. In January 1606, these men were brought to trial for high treason. The trial took place in London at Westminster Hall, a grand chamber packed to the rafters with spectators. Even King James and his family watched in secret from behind a screen. The prisoners included Guy Fawkes, Thomas Wintour, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Wintour, Thomas Bates, John Grant, Henry Garnet, a Jesuit priest implicated after the fact, and Sir Everard Digby, who had been captured separately. A few others, like Francis Tresham, never made it to trial. Tresham had fallen ill and died in the Tower, cheating the hangman. The outcome of the trial was a foregone conclusion. The evidence, the gunpowder, the confessions, was overwhelming. All the surviving conspirators were found guilty of treason. The Attorney General, Sir Edward Coke, delivered a fiery speech describing how close they came to wiping out the royal family and government. He spared no detail in outlining the punishment for treason, which was to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. A terrifyingly brutal sentence. The judges decreed that the traitors would be executed halfway between heaven and earth as unworthy of both. In ghastly detail, the sentence ordered that each man be hanged until half dead, then cut down, disemboweled, and emasculated while still alive, their body finally quartered into pieces. It was a fate designed to horrify, the ultimate punishment for the ultimate crime. On January 30th, 1606, the first group of plotters, including Everard Digby, Robert Winter, John Grant, and Thomas Bates, were executed in St. Paul's churchyard. Digby, knowing he was to die, asked forgiveness of the spectators. He was shown none. One by one, they suffered the horrific death of a traitor. The very next day, January 31st, 1606, it was Guy Fawkes's turn. He was led to the gallows erected in the old palace yard at Westminster, directly opposite the Parliament building he had tried to destroy. A weakened Guy Fawkes, limbs trembling, the torture had left him in terrible condition, climbs the ladder to the noose. He manages a final act of defiance. When the noose is placed around his neck, Fawkes jumps from the ladder. A sudden drop. His neck snaps instantly. In that merciful moment, Guy Fawkes died, cheating the executioner of the full torture. His lifeless body was still quartered, and his severed head, along with those of his fellow conspirators, was displayed on pikes outside the House of Lords, a grisly warning to any who would dare imitate their treason. Thus, the Gunpowder Plot ended in blood and infamy. Catesby, Percy and the Wrights lay dead at Holbeach. Fawkes and the rest met their gruesome public fate in London. In the eyes of King James's government, justice had been served. Yet the repercussions of this conspiracy would linger for centuries.
In the immediate aftermath of November 1605, a wave of national relief and anti-Catholic fury swept England. King James's survival was hailed as divine providence. Parliament quickly passed new laws to tighten restrictions on Catholics even further. The Popish Recusants Act 1606 imposed more severe penalties and required Catholics to swear an oath of allegiance to the crown over the Pope. Any lingering hopes that James might show leniency to Catholic subjects were utterly dashed. The Gunpowder Plot had poisoned the well for Catholic acceptance in English society for generations. A tragic setback for those who had not condoned Catesby's violence. The Gunpowder Plot backfired spectacularly for English Catholics. Instead of sparking a revolt, it provoked a Protestant backlash. Even Catholic foreign powers publicly condemned the plot. They called the conspirators atheists and Protestant heretics in an effort to distance themselves. In England, Catholics who had nothing to do with the plot found life even harder. They faced greater suspicion and harsher laws. In a very real sense, the plot made things worse for the very people it was supposed to help. For the monarchy and Protestant England, however, November 5th became a day of thanksgiving, almost a second birthday for King James. By royal decree and an Act of Parliament in 1606, November 5th was designated each year as a day of public thanksgiving for the joyful deliverance of the king and kingdom. Almost immediately, the English began marking the date with celebratory ritual. Church bells pealed on every November 5th. Special sermons were preached in churches, and bonfires were lit in towns and villages across the country. On the first anniversary in 1606, Londoners illuminated the night with bonfires and fireworks, celebrating the failure of the powder treason. The tradition caught on, year after year. Over time, this commemoration evolved into what is now known as Guy Fawkes Night or Bonfire Night. To this day, especially in the UK, the evening of November 5th is marked by fireworks displays and bonfires burning brightly against the autumn sky. Often an effigy, a stuffed figure called a Guy, a nod to Guy Fawkes, is placed atop the pyre and set ablaze, symbolizing the execution of the notorious traitor. In earlier times, children would wheel these effigies through the streets asking for a penny for the Guy, before the effigy met its fiery end. The celebration has endured, transforming over the centuries into a more light-hearted festival. But its core purpose remains: to remember the thwarting of the Gunpowder Plot. Guy Fawkes became the iconic name attached to the conspiracy, unfairly or not, since he wasn't the leader. His very name became synonymous with the plot. Even today, over 400 years later, British families gather on the night of November 5th to light bonfires and set off fireworks in celebration of the King's deliverance. It's essentially a folk holiday. People may not attend church services for it anymore, but they do recite the traditional rhyme. Remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder treason and plot. That collective memory of the plot has never faded. And so, the story of the Gunpowder Plot of 1605 lives on in Britain's cultural memory. A cautionary tale of extremism and consequence. What was intended as a deadly act of rebellion instead reinforced the very system it sought to destroy. King James I went on to reign for 20 more years. The British Parliament, which Guy Fawkes had tried to blow apart, still opens each session with a ceremonial search of the cellars. A nod to history, and an assurance that the infamous plot is never repeated. Remember, remember, the 5th of November.
The words continue to resonate. How would England be different today if Guy Fawkes had been successful? Tell me in the comments.